Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Neoliberal Podcast, part of the Center for New Liberalism. I'm your host, Jeremiah Johnson, and this is a late-breaking episode that we are recording late night on the night of March 30th, as Donald Trump has been indicted. In what is an unprecedented situation, Donald Trump will be the first former president to face criminal charges post-presidency. We do not yet know what the charges are, but it appears that the case is focused on a hush money payment that Donald Trump paid to a porn star during his 2016 campaign. This episode, we're recording it kind of as the news is breaking. It's entirely possible that 12 hours from now, some of the things that we're saying will be a little bit out of date because things seem to be updating very quickly. So we're going to get this out as quickly as possible, so it's as relevant as possible when you're listening to it. That's this episode, so let's jump in directly to what's happening. So we don't know the exact charges. We don't know for sure how many there are, although there has been some reporting on this. But what we do know is that the Manhattan DA, Alvin Bragg, has indicted Donald Trump. What's this about? Let's cover just first what is the basic situation here. The background is that Donald Trump had a relationship with a porn star named Stormy Daniels. This occurred in 2006, according to Ms. Daniels' testimony. Obviously, Donald Trump denies this. He denies that there was ever anything between them. You can imagine why he does that, but according to Mrs. Daniels' account, they met at some celebrity golf tournament, and Trump invited her to his hotel room, and one thing leads to another, blah, blah, blah. Years later, in 2011, Trump was exploring a run for the presidency that he ended up not making, but at the same time that was happening, Stormy Daniels was considering selling this story because Trump was in the news. Of course, none of this ended up happening, but in 2016, Trump did run for president. Apparently, as the story goes, in the spring of 2016, Mrs. Daniels was approaching media outlets, such as the National Enquirer, to sell her story, hoping to get a payday with a salacious story about the porn star who slept with Donald Trump, the presidential contender. Apparently, there were no biters, as this was seen as old news to some extent. It was just not seen as something worth talking about. I don't know. I don't know what the standard is for these things, but apparently they did not get many takers on these offers. But then the dynamics changed on October 7th, 2016. That is when the infamous Access Hollywood tape came out that had Trump, being incredibly vulgar, unwittingly kind of bragging about sexually assaulting women, basically grabbing them in their genital areas without permission, saying that they let you do it. They let me do it because I'm a star. And that obviously really hurt Donald Trump, and it reignited sort of interest in Donald Trump's misbehavior in the realm of sexuality, I guess. All of a sudden, Donald Trump's sexual proclivities now are news again, and so Stormy Daniels immediately begins shopping her story again. During this process, the National Enquirer's editor apparently connected the lawyers for Donald Trump and Stormy Daniels, and those lawyers negotiated a $130,000 payment. The deal being that Stormy Daniels would remain silent and Donald Trump would pay the money. Now, the money actually came from Donald Trump's lawyer, Mr. Cohen, and that's going to be very important later on here. But that is the basic arrangement we're talking about. Donald Trump and his lawyer arranged to pay hush money to a porn star so that she would not come out with a damaging story in the middle of an election. The indictment that is happening appears to be related to this. We don't know yet what the exact charges are, but we can make some informed guesses and some speculation. We're going to get into some of the details here. And again, most of this is speculation, but I would consider it fairly informed speculation from people who, there are sources flying around, there are reporters who are reporting things, and information is flying around right now. I think there is a picture that is starting to appear And it's probably not 100% accurate, but I believe that it is materially accurate, and it's worth discussing. One of the key components of the case appears to be the way that Donald Trump and his company, the Trump Organization, handled reimbursing Mr. Cohen, Trump's lawyer, for the payment of $130,000 that he executed to Stormy Daniels. Now, this lawyer, Michael Cohen, is kind of a key figure here. He paid the money out of his own accounts to basically pay off Stormy Daniels, but internal Trump Organization records falsely classified those reimbursements as legal expenses. So the chain here is that Michael Cohen paid the money to Stormy Daniels out of his own funds, and then he billed the Trump Organization for that money, and they paid him that money, and they called it legal expenses. That was to help conceal the purpose of the payments, according to Michael Cohen, who said that Donald Trump knew about the misleading records. Donald Trump and his lawyers deny this. In New York, falsifying business records like that is a crime, and the DA's office may have built its case around this charge of falsifying documents, according to sources that are floating around. This is a fairly common thing for the DA to prosecute. The New York Times has reported that since the DA, Alvin Bragg, took office in 2022, prosecutors in his office have filed 117 felony counts of this type of charge, this type of false business records charge. Now, one of the complicating factors here is that for a falsifying business record charge to be a felony instead of a misdemeanor in New York, prosecutors must show that Donald Trump's fraudulent business records were created with an intent to commit or conceal a second crime. That is going to be the subject of much speculation. We don't yet know what that second crime might be. But in order to be charged as a felony, there will have to be a second crime. And so many people are speculating as to what that might be. That crime could be a violation of election law. There is quite a lot of speculation and theorizing that the payout could have served as a donation to Trump's campaign because, after all, the campaign benefited from it. It was specifically done to benefit the campaign, and that, concealing a $130,000 donation to a presidential campaign is a violation of federal election law. And so concealing these business documents, falsifying these business documents, is a misdemeanor crime, and it became a felony because it was done with the purpose to aid in the crime of covering up election contributions. Now, obviously, Donald Trump's lawyers deny all of this. They deny that there was ever a relationship with Stormy Daniels. They deny that Donald Trump knew about the payments. They deny the theory that the money, even if it exists, amounted to a campaign donation. They deny all of it. They say all of this is flawed and false and so on and so forth, as you would expect. This legal theory is potentially somewhat novel, and if it is what the district attorney is running with in this indictment, it will definitely face challenges. Donald Trump's lawyers will challenge the idea that falsifying documents with the secondary crime of violating federal election law is something that can even be done, because this type of case has not been brought before. Nobody has ever done state charges of falsifying documents in order to support secondary charge of federal election law. Therefore, it makes it a felony. That kind of thing doesn't have a long case history in New York, and that makes it potentially vulnerable to legal challenges and appeals. So that is the meat and potatoes of what's actually happening here. That is kind of the factual description of where we are. Stormy Daniels, Donald Trump, did the nasty, hush money, she didn't talk about it. The Trump Organization falsified some documents, and that was a crime, and Donald Trump knew about it and okayed it, and now he's being charged with that crime. There's a lot of nuance here, but that seems to be what we're looking at. How should we react to all this? I personally am having a number of reactions here immediately. Like everyone else, I jumped on Twitter and made a bunch of jokes, because that's what you do. Twitter is hopping tonight. There is just an enormous amount of great posting. Get on social media and laugh at some stuff. That's always encouraged. But beyond that, to be a little bit more serious, if I'm honest, I'm a little bit nervous about how this whole thing is going down. And I'm unsure whether this was the right move. It's hard to know right now. I have a lot of uncertainty about whether this was a good idea and what will happen. And I can share why I'm so uncertain about this. When we think about criminal justice issues and we think about the law, we normally start from the presumption that people who break the law deserve to be prosecuted. That seems like a fairly reasonable standard, but of course it doesn't apply universally. We have a lot of laws. There's a million different laws on the books, and you sometimes read about these old laws that, they're still on the books, but they're never enforced anymore. It's illegal to spit sideways on a Wednesday when it's raining in Oklahoma or something like that. And so obviously we don't enforce all the laws. And even then we have laws that we kind of know are not enforced all the time, things like speeding, jaywalking. And there's a sliding scale here, right? We would prefer that, for instance, all murders should be prosecuted, but perhaps not all instances of jaywalking. And my point here is just that we don't enforce all the laws all the time. That's not a standard that anywhere lives up to. And so it's not a universal principle that you should always prosecute somebody just because they've broken the law. When it comes to a former president, I especially think we have to be careful with this kind of thing, because essentially we do have a really, really complex system of laws in our country, especially laws that relate to handling documents, handling classified documents, election law, campaign law, financial law. And if we hunt hard enough, we can probably construct legal theories about how basically every president, and hell, every candidate and every senator has broken some law in some way, at least once. And I don't want there to be a precedent, basically, where under the guise of everyone has to follow the law, no exceptions, right? You can go after your political opponents. Because after all, they must have done something. You can always catch them for something. I think the right equilibrium here is that politicians should mostly act with a sense of decorum and legality and honor and not egregiously break the law. And in return, their opponents don't go on witch hunts and try to, find any charge that they can possibly drum up against them. Your opponents should act with legality and honor, and then we won't go after you for minor breaches of the law that you may have just stumbled into. And this is a good equilibrium to have. And I think it's the equilibrium we had for a while, past tense. Obviously, this equilibrium now seems broken. I think Gerald Ford and his pardon of Richard Nixon was pretty damaging to this equilibrium, because Nixon committed fairly serious crimes and Ford forgave him. And it seemed like, that might break the equilibrium. What do you do if the president just actually does commit really serious stuff? But, Richard Nixon mostly disappeared from life, and it seemed like politics had gotten back to normal, maybe. But obviously, Donald Trump has once again just completely destroyed this kind of fragile situation that we had going. What it seems like has happened is that we've had a breakdown in kind of morality and in ethical behavior and in the precedent that we've been setting. And, Donald Trump has basically destroyed all of those things. And instead of precedent and instead of basic ethical norms and basic moral norms, we're now having to rely on the law. And the law is a very blunt tool, to be honest. There's not a lot of nuance to being charged or not charged. Either you are or you aren't. And, when you're talking about a former president, you can't, halfway indict him. You either indict him or you don't. And if you indict him, you better be ready for the full storm that's going to come your way. So, I don't know. I feel a little bit uneasy about this. Because look, if Donald Trump has egregiously broken the law, then I agree, yes, there's a sense in which he should be prosecuted. And that makes sense, and I do agree with that. But at the same time, I'm just worried about potentially setting a precedent where now the Republicans can go after anyone they want. And that doesn't mean we should just let Donald Trump get away with everything. Let Donald Trump do anything he wants, and we'll never prosecute him. But I do just want to acknowledge that there is a downside. I'm not saying that downside means let's never do anything. Again, I just want to acknowledge the downsides and the risk that this poses to the system. Now, as a caveat, again, there's a flood of commentary going on right now, and it's assessing, does this case have merit? What is this going to mean politically? And blah, 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 blah. And I want to stress again, we have not yet seen the charges. Nobody talking in public right now actually knows how District Attorney Alvin Bragg is constructing his case. I'm trying to take all of this with a fairly large grain of salt, and I would recommend that you do that too until more details come out. One detail that has just come out, and it came out about 10 minutes before we started recording, so this is very late breaking. The reporter Robert Costa has tweeted out that sources familiar with the investigation tell CBS that DA Alvin Bragg has documents that have been uncovered during the probe, but are not yet known to the public and have not been reported. These are financial records and communications between key figures that they will use as well as testimony. In addition, CNN is reporting that there are 34 counts in the Trump indictment, which is far more than expected. 34 counts would be an enormous amount of counts if this is just about the Stormy Daniels payment. It is theoretically possible that you could get 34 separate counts if the only issue at stake here is the Stormy Daniels payment and the cover-up and the falsified documents and the secondary charges, but it would be a stretch. It would be a stretch to believe that there are 34 different documents or 34 separate instances of behavior. What seems more likely at this time is that there are additional cases being brought here. Some people are speculating that secondary charges could involve hush money paid to a second woman, Karen McDougal. People are also trying to piece together what these additional charges might be from who's testified. We know that Michael Cohen, who is the lawyer for Trump, is completely cooperating with the case and testified to the grand jury. We know that David Pecker, who is the head of the company that owns the National Enquirer, that he testified to the grand jury twice. But that is a piece of information that we do not know yet. We simply don't know what the 34 charges might be. We don't even know 100% whether that number is accurate yet. CNN has reported that, but as far as I know, it does not yet appear to be widely accepted fact, like we've got this on a factual basis. We'll just have to wait and see for the actual charges to be released. My sincere hope here is that if Alvin Bragg has brought these charges, I really hope they have an ironclad case against Donald Trump. If this is the kind of case where Donald Trump could feasibly wriggle out of these charges, the case is weak, or maybe if you squint, it wasn't really illegal, or maybe by the letter of the law, the document technically wasn't falsified. If it's that kind of situation where it's not an ironclad thing, then I would be really worried. I think this could be really bad. The consequences of Trump getting indicted and then walking free because he was found not guilty, I just think the consequences of that could be really potentially dire. In a number of obvious ways, really. I think, obviously, it would embolden Trump to do a lot of other illegal stuff. It would embolden all future politicians that you can falsify documents and you can cheat in a lot of different ways, and frankly, no one's ever going to convict you. That would be a really bad message to send. I think if Trump walks away from this and is found not guilty, then it's possible that his popularity goes up. I mean, I don't think that would happen, but certainly stranger things have happened with Donald Trump. And God knows if he is found not guilty, that he will brag about it until the end of time. He will take it as justification that, all of the Republican Party will rally around him and say this is an unfair witch hunt. The Democrats are just trying to unfairly persecute anyone who's not a Democrat, and blah, 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 blah. And there's real risk here. There's risk to our democratic system if Trump is found not guilty. So that's why, I just think if you bring these charges, you have to win. What's the phrase? You come at the king, you best not miss. I think that applies here. You cannot have these charges happen if you're the DA and then fail to convict. You better have an ironclad case. Another thing that you're going to hear frequently is that this is not just the Trump indictment. This is the first Trump indictment. This is not potentially the last Trump indictment. There are many other investigations that are ongoing. There is an investigation in Georgia about his conduct there in trying to overturn the election. And frankly, some people think we could see an indictment from the prosecutor in Georgia soon. We think he might be under indictment for two things at once here very quickly. There are federal cases about his conduct in the lead up to January 6th and his attempt to stay in power. There are federal investigations into how he's handled classified documents. Trump could feasibly be seeing 2, 3, 4 different indictments head his way on various timeframes. And it's not like this is his first legal trouble either. I believe it's the first time that Donald Trump himself, the man, will be indicted on charges. But, his organizations and his associates have often gotten in trouble. The Trump organization has been charged and convicted of many things. It was convicted in a 15-year tax fraud scheme recently. It's been convicted in the past of discriminating against minorities and how they handle their properties. They've had all kinds of trouble. As we noted, Michael Cohen, who is Trump's lawyer, personal lawyer and associate for a long time, is cooperating in this case. And Cohen pled guilty to the charges of falsifying documents that we're talking about right now. Cohen has already pled guilty to these charges. Donald Trump is going to fight them. The CFO of the Trump organization, Alan Weisselberg, has pled guilty on tax charges. So Trump has frequently been around legal misconduct, but I do think this is the first time the man himself has ever been charged. One angle to this that I think about is whether or not this indictment makes other indictments more likely. If we're being real, if we get out of the realm of law and we get into the realm of actual human psychology, it's got to be very difficult to actually pull the trigger on indicting a former president. It has never been done before, and there was a lot of hesitation to do this. In fact, the previous district attorney to Alvin Bragg sat on this case and ended up kind of passing it along. He never actually pulled the trigger. Probably he felt a lot of uncertainty about whether it was appropriate to do this or not. But I wonder, now that this has happened and Donald Trump has been indicted, the first person has indicted him, I wonder if it makes it easier for the second district attorney down in Georgia to indict him as well. Well, somebody else did it, so now I'm not the first one. Maybe now the federal district attorney, who is overseeing the federal case, maybe they will indict. I wonder about that. I also kind of think about international comparisons here. I wish I knew more about this, but I do know that it's fairly common in many other countries to kind of indict and charge your president with crimes. And this is not like a third world thing necessarily. Certainly in third world countries, sometimes you will see, blatant power grabs where you throw your opponent in prison. But even in countries like France, France has charged Sarkozy with a crime, and I think other former French presidents have also faced charges. I'm pretty sure Sarkozy was found guilty and is now appealing, but Sarkozy might have to go to jail, being a former president of France. I'm pretty sure multiple South Korean presidents have gone to jail. And so I just want to note that this is something that happens in other countries. I don't know how much use we can get out of that because I don't think that we can necessarily take lessons from them because our political systems are just too different. It's very odd to be like, well, this happened in South Korea, so it should be fine here. It doesn't always work that way. But it is interesting to note that this is not some sort of crazy scenario that would never come up in any other rich country. How does this impact Donald Trump's campaign? Honestly, who the hell knows? I assume it's bad. I assume that it hurts his campaign, but again, who knows? He's gonna just fight through it. Donald Trump only ever has one way of dealing with things. It's completely and utterly and ludicrously fake. It's fake news. Everything is fake. If it's for me, it's good and perfect. If it's against me, it's awful and biased and fake. And he's just going to deny his way through all of it. He's going to deny. He will never take responsibility or admit to anything. And maybe it'll work. I don't know. This doesn't stop him from running for president. It wouldn't even stop him from getting elected. He could get convicted and go to jail. Jail is a possibility here, and he could still get elected from jail. There's technically nothing that would stop that. Now, in reality, if he is convicted and in jail, it seems like it would be impossible for him to get elected. But again, weird things tend to happen with Donald Trump on the ballot box. I don't know. According to reports, Trump plans to surrender next week, potentially on Tuesday, although the reporting on that is still coming out. My understanding is that there's basically no way for him to avoid the perp walk, that he's going to have to appear in person, he's going to have to surrender himself to the authorities, get fingerprinted and mugshot taken, and all of that is going to have to happen, and then he will be released on bail, I assume right away, but he will have to go through the process of being arrested, basically, and going through that process, and that there's not really a way out of that. I understand that a lot of people are probably feeling pretty joyful about that, gleeful at the idea of Donald Trump doing a perp walk and getting, his mugshot taken. There will always be a Donald Trump mugshot picture. And I get that, and that's fine to some extent. But, I don't really feel as gleeful as I thought I would. If you put aside whether he's legally convicted or not, and put aside whether he technically broke the law or not. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, according to the technicalities of the law. I'm not a lawyer. But just how far have we fallen? That the President of the United States, the former president, is known as just a cheat and a serial fraudster, a tax cheat, a guy who cheated on all his wives, cheated with porn stars, and then paid them hush money that was wrongfully disguised as business expenses, who's just at the center of so many controversies. I could go on with all his improprieties, but you get the idea. We could be here for 20 minutes while I list them all. But it's just sad that we're at this point. I'm saddened by the fact that we're here, that the presidency of the United States, an office which should command respect, has fallen in this way. It's also very discouraging to watch the GOP reaction. The whole party is just fully poisoned and so far gone at this point. They are essentially fine with Trump's criminal behavior. The entire party is jumping to defend him. Regardless of whether he's guilty or not, they have decided beforehand that this is a politically motivated prosecution that has no merit. They've not seen the facts of the case. They decided that before it ever came out. And it's very discouraging to watch the entire Republican Party just lick Trump's boots. Over and over and over, they are offering him no resistance. It is entirely his party. Even Ron DeSantis, who is his primary challenger, who wants to be president, even Ron DeSantis has come out full swinging about how this thing is fake and he doesn't respect it. He won't cooperate if he's asked to, blah, 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 blah. It's just discouraging to see that, one of the two major parties in America is essentially just in the personal thrall of one guy. And they would rather, deny reality for a chance to lick the bottom of his shoes. It's just gross. So, there's some fun stuff going on Twitter. People are making great jokes and great memes, and there's celebrations going on and all that. But I can't find it in myself to really be all that happy. The final thing I wonder before we wrap up this episode is how the actual trial will play out. How on earth are they going to find an unbiased jury? Holy shit. I mean, think about that. They're pulling from New York City. The baseline pool of potential jurors here is going to be very, very Democratic leaning. You wonder if this just becomes a test of opinion. You know, do the jurors like Trump or not? Will they actually decide based on the facts of the case? Or is this just going to be an opinion poll done among 12 people? I wonder how much this impacts his public opinion standing, Trump's, as the trial plays out. If we get into a long, complicated trial where it's on television, we're getting breathless reports for months as this drags out, because it will drag out. This will not be the kind of thing that goes quickly. I wonder, what does this do to his popularity and his standing in the presidential race as the trial happens? Will there be damaging details that are released? What if there is widespread blowback, not against Trump, but against Democrats? What if the case seems very weak and the public doesn't think that it's a strong case? Will that hurt Joe Biden, for instance, even though Biden did not make this decision? One of the serious things that I worry about is, what if there's unrest? What if, the Republicans are so incensed by this that they start rioting and trying to, I don't even know what a worst case scenario looks like here, but I just worry about that kind of stuff. I worry about the political risk in doing this, and that this could have fairly negative consequences to our country's political health if it goes in the wrong way, if this devolves into something nasty and horrible and it doesn't work out like we expect it to, and maybe it's a really contentious fight and Trump is also acquitted and found not guilty. Maybe this is really bad for the country. I don't know. It's just something I worry about. I think that is a logical stopping point for this episode. I hope this episode was informative. I hope it helped you learn a little bit about the details of the case, which are obviously still breaking right now. So, stay tuned to the news, but hopefully this was a good first primer on why Donald Trump has been indicted and the history of it. Hopefully it was also helpful in terms of reflecting on what the details of the case are going to be moving forward and what it means. What does this mean for our democracy? What does it mean for the rule of law? How should we think about this kind of thing when, former politicians are indicted on charges? All of this is new ground, and we're going to have to work through it together. And I hope that this was helpful in doing so. As always, if you have any thoughts, you can send them to mailbag@cnliberalism.org. Let me know if I'm right, if I'm wrong, if I got something wrong, if I'm a hero or an idiot. It's all welcome. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and we will catch you at the next one.